Hello and welcome to our channel. Today I'm going to be summarizing The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. In this book, the author provides insightful and practical advice on how to improve your decision-making skills and think more logically. Dobelli takes us through 99 common cognitive biases and offers a fresh perspective on how to recognize and avoid these biases in our everyday lives. Whether you're a student, a business professional, or just someone looking to improve your critical thinking skills, The Art of Thinking Clearly is a must-read. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn about some of the most important lessons from this fantastic book. Chapter 1. Introduction. This chapter introduces the reader to the concept of cognitive biases and the importance of recognizing and avoiding them in order to make better decisions. The author argues that our thinking is often clouded by biases that lead us astray, and he offers the book as a guide for thinking more clearly and avoiding these biases. Chapter 2. The Bias Blind Spot. This chapter explores the concept of the bias blind spot, which refers to our tendency to overestimate our own ability to think objectively and underestimate the influence of biases in our own thinking. Dobelli argues that we are all susceptible to this bias, but that it is possible to overcome it by being aware of our biases and making a conscious effort to avoid them. Chapter 3. Confirmation Bias. This chapter focuses on the confirmation bias, which is the tendency to seek out information that supports our existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead us astray, such as in politics, investing, and science, and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 4. Hindsight Bias. This chapter explores the hindsight bias, which is the tendency to believe, after an event has occurred, that we would have been able to predict it. Dobelli explains how this bias can lead us to be overconfident and to overlook the role of luck and randomness in life. He provides practical advice for avoiding the hindsight bias, such as learning from past experiences without becoming overly confident in our ability to predict future events. Chapter 5. Overconfidence. This chapter focuses on the dangers of overconfidence and how it can lead us to take unnecessary risks and make poor decisions. Dobelli provides examples of overconfidence in various areas of life, such as investing and sports, and offers practical advice for avoiding it, such as seeking out diverse perspectives, being aware of our limitations, and avoiding the sunk cost fallacy. Chapter 6. The sunk cost fallacy. This chapter explores the sunk cost fallacy, which is the tendency to continue investing in a project or idea because of the resources that have already been invested, even if it is no longer rational to do so. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 7. The Negativity Bias. This chapter discusses the negativity bias, which is the tendency for negative information to have a greater impact on our thoughts, feelings, and decisions than positive information. Dobelli provides examples of how this bias can lead to a skewed view of the world and offers tips for avoiding it. Chapter 8. The Availability Heuristic. This chapter explores the availability heuristic, which is the tendency to make judgments based on the most recent information that comes to mind, rather than on a more comprehensive analysis of the situation. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 9. The Halo Effect. This chapter discusses the halo effect, which is the tendency to make broad generalizations about a person based on a single characteristic or trait. Dobelli provides examples of how this bias can lead to biased judgments and offers practical tips for avoiding it. Chapter 10. The Framing Effect. This chapter focuses on the framing effect, which is the tendency for people's choices to be influenced by how a problem or choice is presented or framed. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to different decisions and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 11. The Endowment Effect. This chapter focuses on the endowment effect, which is the tendency for people to value items they own more highly than similar items they do not own. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making in areas such as investing and negotiation, and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 12. The Curse of Knowledge. This chapter discusses the curse of knowledge, which is the tendency for people who have knowledge about a subject to have difficulty imagining what it is like to not know that information. Dobelli provides examples of how this bias can lead to poor communication and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 13. The Affect Heuristic. This chapter explores the affect heuristic, which is the tendency to make decisions based on our emotional state rather than on a more objective analysis of the situation. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 14. The Availability Cascade. This chapter focuses on the availability cascade, which is a self-reinforcing process by which a piece of information becomes more widely believed the more it is repeated. Dobelli provides examples of how this bias can lead to false beliefs and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 15. The Social Proof Heuristic. This chapter discusses the social proof heuristic, which is the tendency to follow the actions of others when making decisions. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 16. Confirmation Bias. This chapter focuses on confirmation bias, which is the tendency to seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our existing beliefs and prejudices. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to false beliefs and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 17. The Availability Bias. This chapter discusses the availability bias, which is the tendency to base decisions on information that is readily available, rather than on a more comprehensive analysis of the situation. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 18. The Just World Bias. This chapter explores the just world bias, which is the belief that the world is fair and that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Dobelli provides examples of how this bias can lead to a skewed view of the world and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 19. The Fundamental Attribution Error. This chapter focuses on the fundamental attribution error, which is the tendency to overemphasize dispositional internal explanations for other people's behavior and underemphasize situational external explanations. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to incorrect judgments and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 20. The Anchoring Bias. This chapter discusses the anchoring bias, which is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information encountered when making decisions. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 21. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. This chapter focuses on the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the tendency for people with limited knowledge or skills in a particular area to overestimate their ability. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 22. The Halo Effect. This chapter discusses the halo effect, which is the tendency to judge a person or thing based on one positive characteristic, leading to an overestimation of their overall qualities. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to incorrect judgments and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 23. The Sunk Cost Fallacy. This chapter explores the sunk cost fallacy, which is the tendency to persist in a decision or action because of the resources already invested, even if it is no longer rational to do so. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 24. The IKEA Effect. This chapter focuses on the IKEA effect, which is the tendency to place a higher value on products we have invested time and effort into, such as those we have assembled ourselves. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers advice for avoiding it. Chapter 25. The Negativity Bias. This chapter discusses the negativity bias, which is the tendency to give more weight to negative information than positive information when making decisions. Dobelli provides numerous examples of how this bias can lead to poor decision-making and offers practical advice for avoiding it. Chapter 26. The Sunk Cost Fallacy Revisited. This chapter is a follow-up to Chapter 23, focusing once again on the sunk cost fallacy. Dobelli provides additional examples and advice for avoiding this bias. Chapter 27. The Problem of Induction. This chapter discusses the problem of induction, which is the difficulty of making generalizations based on a limited number of observations. Dobelli provides practical examples of how this problem can lead to false beliefs and offers advice for avoiding it. In conclusion, The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli is a powerful guide to improving our thinking and decision-making abilities. By exploring the numerous cognitive biases that affect our judgment, Dobelli provides practical advice and real-life examples to help us avoid these biases and make better decisions. The biggest takeaway from this book is the importance of being mindful of our own thinking and making a conscious effort to avoid these biases. By doing so, we can improve our ability to think clearly and make better decisions in our everyday lives. Thank you for watching this video, and we hope you found it useful. I hope you enjoyed this video on the art of thinking clearly. If you have any suggestions for other books that you would like me to summarize, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your recommendations. Thanks for watching,